Since I reviewed the NiceHCK T4 a few weeks back, I've been getting loads of comments to check out the Blon BL-03s. So here it is with all its meme-worthy packaging, and let's take the opportunity to take a look at these Blon BL-03s and find out if they are the IEM of your dreams. Hey guys, it's Noel and this is Wheezy Reviews, and these are the Blon BL-03s. So these are a cost-effective Chi-Fi earphone with a 32 ohm and 102 dB SPL dynamic carbon nanotube driver. I purchased these from AliExpress, the seller EE audio store. They cost me £27 or $30, and they came bundled with an aftermarket cable. This one is Yinyu branded. Now this is a good thing, and I think highly recommended, as the stock Blon cable is rather lackluster. So this Blon cable is rather thin and admittedly quite flexible. However, it does tend to tangle quite easy, and part of that is due to these rather stiff ear hooks. And these stiff ear hooks tend to catch on other part of the cables and then make it difficult to untangle them. And these stiff ear hooks also cause another issue. Because they're so stiff, that has obvious comfort implications. And this can create a certain amount of tension which exerts a certain force against the IEM and can lead to them slowly pulling the IEM out of your ears. Now this is probably not a big issue if you're buying the BL-03s with the aftermarket cable, but it should be noted perhaps that the upgraded cable for the Blon BL-03s is not really just a luxury, but really kind of a necessity. I should note that the BL-03s use a 2-pin 0.78 connector, not a QDC, as they do appear to look like a QDC, but they're not a QDC connector. Now, if purchasing from the likes of Amazon, this might end up being a little bit costly, but when you buy from AliExpress with the bundled cable, you're actually going to pay less than the price of the BL-03s by themselves on Amazon. So, you know, there is that. Now, comfort is really rather good. They have this rather svelte and ergonomic shape with very little bulk. The body of the IEM itself is made from kersite, which is a form of cast zinc alloy, and they're quite light. In terms of tips, which is of course a very, very personal thing, I never found that I got on with any of the stock tips that came with these, and let's talk about those. So you get the usual small, medium, and large silicone tips, but you also get a couple of spin fit style tips. If I turn this one inside out, yeah, you can see there that it has that sort of recess there, which allows it a certain amount of flex in a similar way to the spin fit ones. I don't think these are genuine spin fit tips, but they certainly seem to be inspired by them anyway. And here we go. This is the spin fit style tip attached, and you can see it's got a certain amount of flex to it like that. And that should, in theory, mean that they fit into your ears a little bit better. They certainly do sit off the body of the IEM nicely, so they've got a good amount of insertion depth there. Although this is where things get a bit weird, because personally, I can't get on with any of these silicone tips that were supplied, so I tried using them with foam tips. So I tried the Blon BL-03s with the Comply T400, the NiceHCK tips, and also the NiceHCK tips, which I got from AliExpress. These are actually really quite nice tips. They've got a certain amount of tackiness to them, makes them grip nice and easy. The problem with using the foam tips, though, is that they go onto the nozzle a lot deeper than the original silicone tips. And so what that leads to is a much shorter insertion depth than you would with the silicones. And this tip fit also highlights another issue. When this foam tip is touching the body of the IEM, it is blocking a vent hole at the base of the nozzle. And that results in a significantly increased bass performance and a considerable amount of driver flex when adjusting the IEM in the ear. Let's see if I can find that. There we go. There's a little vent hole just there. So the solution that I came up with was to pad the nozzle with a small little O-ring. So these are 4mm internal diameter and 8mm external diameter, 2mm thickness. And I just pop this onto the nozzle. There we go, and push it all the way to the base. Now this isn't big enough to block that little vent hole. You can just about see the vent hole. And then when you pop the tip back on, it actually sits off of the body of the IEM quite nicely. Thus, the tip isn't going to block that vent hole, and you also have a bit more insertion depth now so that you can get these in your ears and they'll stay in quite nicely. Now, I mentioned driver flex, and that's not just something that I noticed when the vent hole was blocked, but also more generally, particularly in the left ear rather than the right. It was worse when the vent hole was blocked, but I did notice it when adjusting the IEM in my ear. The driver would be flexing, it makes that clicking noise. I didn't really notice that in normal operation, not like when moving my head around or anything like that, and it didn't cause the driver to lock up or anything like that. So how much of an issue this actually is debatable, but I thought it was something that I should mention. And now would also be a good time to mention unit variance. As with all headphones and earphones, there's going to be a certain amount of unit variance. However, to what degree depends upon the quality control process of the manufacturer. In this case, there have been a fair few reports of quite large variances with the Blon BL-03s in sound signature from one unit to the next. And it might just be pot luck, the quality of the unit that you receive. Whether that's a gamble that's worth it for £27, well, that's entirely up to you. So let's move on to the sound then, speaking purely about this particular unit that I have here. So in terms of sound then, they have a rather relaxed and fun, bassy sound signature with a somewhat warm or even dark tilt to them. In terms of soundstage and imaging, they're really nothing special, with an intimate staging. However, they don't feel cramped or anything like that. In terms of timbre, they're rather natural sounding, so I've got no complaints there. They don't sound off or anything. And the bass is big and full with a good amount of authority. Whilst not the most dynamic or quick, it is decently articulate considering the price point. In terms of raw power, the bass is maybe 5 dB up from the tin T4s. There's a good deal of extension into the sub bass, as well as a rather boosted mid and upper bass region. However, this does have a tendency to bleed into the mids somewhat. The mids are really quite warm and full in the low end. This is a really quite thick and fat sound. Unfortunately, this does tend to reach the point of bloating and muddiness, particularly for rock music. However, for EDM and hip hop, this gives a really large and full sound. It's quite enjoyable. Upper mids through to the low and mid treble are on point, but perhaps a little bit recessed between 5 kHz and 8 kHz, particularly versus the tin T4. They have a little less of that brightness or that shout that the T4 has in that range. Now, I've personally no problem with that recession in what is the sibilance region, but vocals are smooth and sweet. Male vocals are a little bit back in the mix, but not to the point that they're overly recessed or anything. Female vocals are rather good and present without sounding thin and brittle or sibilant, but treble, particularly upper treble, does seem a little bit rolled off. There is a bit of energy somewhere around 8 kHz, not to the point that I found I personally had any issue with it, and it's certainly no more energy than there is on the tin T4. But overall, this is a rather smooth, inoffensive, and relaxing sound signature. They're not an aggressive or exciting earphone, and they are lacking somewhat in terms of dynamics and detail resolution. And unfortunately, that does tend to mean they sound a little bit bland and boring at times. However, I think that's probably acceptable for their casual style and price point. Now, I wasn't expecting a super analytical sound for this price. In fact, I wasn't really expecting much at all. I knew they had a fun sound signature rather than a neutral signature, and I was expecting something a lot more coarse and rough around the edges. However, the Blon BL-03s do manage to put in a decent performance for their price point. Now, I'm quite forgiving when it comes to a casual, low-priced headphone or earphone that's been designed for portable use. I tend to think that if you can't provide an analytical performance, then at least smooth off those rough edges and make a casual, relaxing sound signature. And actually, I think the Blon BL-03s do this perfectly. Overall then, whilst not without its flaws, the Blon BL-03 are about as good an earphone as one can expect considering the price point. Comfort is good as long as tip fit isn't an issue for you. For those who prefer phone tips, you're going to have to tweak a little bit to ensure that that vent port is not blocked. The stock cable is rather poor, but easily replaced. Driver flex could be an issue, and there's also the consideration of unit variances to contend with, and the sound, whilst not particularly stellar in terms of detail and dynamics, is quite relaxed and inoffensive, which suits a more casual style, although bass is a little bit overboosted and in places a bit muddy, but I do find it works for EDM and hip-hop. For me, they don't topple the tin Hi-Fi T4 in terms of performance, and if I was trying to decide between the Blon BL-03s and the tin Hi-Fi T4, or even the T2s and T3s, I would probably say just go and get the T4s. But for the price point of £27 or $30, I do think that there is really quite a lot to like about the Blon BL-03s. Right, that's going to be it then. I hope you found this video interesting and informative, and if you did, then don't forget to leave a like, and maybe if you haven't already, consider subscribing by hitting that red button down there, and maybe the bell right next to it. And if you're looking to support the channel, then if you check down in the description, there'll be a bunch of links for different ways on how you can do that. I'm going to have a lot more content like this coming out soon, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.